With the 2019 Women's World Cup fast approaching, it's a good time to revisit a topic that's sure to come up over the next couple of months. Historically, the U.S. men's soccer team has been paid much more than the women's team, even though the women's team has had much more success over the past couple of decades. We're going to explain this difference by looking at the labor markets for each teams. The labor market for each team is a bilateral monopoly in which there is one buyer of labor and one seller of labor. In this case, the buyer of labor is going to be U.S. Soccer, and the seller of labor is going to be the players' unions for each of the respective teams. Just like most economic graphs, we have a demand and a supply curve. The demand curve is equal to the marginal revenue product, or the additional revenue generated from using one more unit of labor, and the supply curve is an aggregation of each player's reservation wage, or the lowest price that they would play for. But in a bilateral monopoly setup, we have one more curve, the marginal factor cost curve. The MFC represents how much it costs U.S. Soccer to hire an additional player, because when they hire an additional player with a higher reservation wage, they must pay everybody a little bit more. In this framework, U.S. Soccer will hire at the quantity where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. The wage is going to depend on negotiations between U.S. Soccer and the players' union. U.S. Soccer would want the wage to be wage 1, but the players' union would want it to be at wage 2. Through negotiation, they will come to a price somewhere in between here. But looking at these graphs, even if the lowest men's wage was chosen and the highest women's wage was chosen, there would still be a disparity between the two wages. This is because there is a great disparity between the marginal revenues of production. In 2015, the Women's World Cup generated $73 million. The 2014 Men's World Cup generated $4 billion. Overall, the men generate much more revenue than the women. This is why the marginal revenue product, or the demand curve, is shifted so much more for the men than it is the women. Overall, the men generate much more revenue than the women. This is why their marginal revenue production is so much greater. So the firm, the U.S. Soccer Federation, in this scenario, is willing to pay more for their labor. It appears that the U.S. Soccer Federation isn't discriminating against women. Rather, they are making wage decisions based off of what makes economic sense for their business.